Sam Oakden is the head of the Australian Food Pact and Stop Food Waste Australia. The Pact is a pre-competitive collaboration to make Australia's food system more sustainable, resilient and circular. It's a multi-year commitment by the businesses who grow, make and sell our food to develop solutions and implement change at scale. In 2022, Sam was awarded the inaugural Emerging Circular Economy Leader Award in the Planet Arc Australian Circular Economy Hub Awards. He has an agricultural science background and has worked on the implementation of the Australian National Food Waste Strategy since early 2018. Please welcome Sam to the stage for his presentation titled Food and Beverage Waste from a National Perspective.
And thanks for giving the presentation for me. I was about to get up here and talk about recovery hierarchy and how we need to focus on prevention and not worry about end of use, as valuable as dealing with those end of pipe inevitable waste is. So I'm Sam Oakden. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction about what we do, talk about the scale of the opportunity. Also, I want to flick the way we think about it. I know we are part of the problem. I have waste in my job title. We have waste in our organisation title. But if we can just think about all these stats that I'm about to walk us through as food. Don't think about food waste. Don't think about the mental image of what you're putting in the bin. Think about it as edible, healthy, nutritious food. Talk a little bit about what we're doing to support Australia on this food waste journey to our 2030 National Food Waste Strategy target of halving our food waste. And then what next? Some tips as promised. So we think we have a relatively unique model. We were established as a partnership call by the federal government, and each of those organisations on the board there, yes, you'll see WA is represented through the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, but each of those organisations have a role in approving, designing and supporting the delivery of our programs. So a broad grouping of stakeholders, but all of the relevant bodies at the table to expedite the progress. Probably enough about that. I will talk a little bit about food rescue shortly as well. Now, and I'll give a little bit of context. Food rescue is not the primary focus of what we do, but as you'll see with some of the numbers we talk about, while we've got 7.6 million tonnes of food waste in Australia and a lot of hungry people, there's some obvious solutions that fall in the middle there. Stop Food Waste Australia, what do we actually do? So we have 4 key areas of action. The Australian Food Pact, which I lead, and we do work primarily with that big end of town. The major organisations, and the recurring theme through this presentation will be the collaboration. We know that there's some structural opportunities within our food system that are leading to waste. Our role, while we can't reinvent the corporate system, we can make new relationships and we can highlight some areas of opportunity, and I'll talk to some of what that might look like. We want to communicate, engage and partner for action. What does that mean? It means things like this. It means not reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of countries, as we heard on the last panel, that have been on this journey for a long, long time. And while we're new to it, we're in Australia and we're nimble and we're fast and we can take advantage of their learnings and do it better and then export it. That's the dream. We can't do anything unless we measure. So that forms a core tenet of all of our programs. So if we're not measuring, we can't manage. It's an old adage, but it's very true. And then sector action plans, a little bit different, a little bit more altruistic, but where we can take a whole sector view to various what we call hotspots in our parlance, but where there's a volume of food waste and a coalition of willing organisations to do something about it. All right, so what is the opportunity? Many of you will be familiar with some of these statistics. The reason we exist as an organisation, the reason a lot of other environmental groups exist, the reason food waste is on the agenda for this event is approximately across the world, about 1/3 of all food produced is wasted. That is an absolute travesty. That's not talking about the food. We could just think about the fertiliser or the water or the land use. We've heard a lot already about the climate change impacts of that food waste and the supply chain ramifications for that. And nope, not on that slide, don't worry. We know there's hungry people, so that's part of that solution, that picture as well. What about in Australia? 25 million hectares of land used to grow food that is subsequently lost or wasted. 4 times Tasmania's. Might seem small over here in terms of land use, but it is a huge piece of agricultural land. That 2,628 gigalitres of water, that doubles our domestic household water use per capita used to grow food that is subsequently wasted somewhere on the supply chain. I'm from Melbourne, so I think in MCGs, about 9 MCGs, somewhere between 9 and 10 MCGs of food waste every year in Australia, costing the Australian economy somewhere around $36 billion. That's the opportunity. Some older stats had 1 in 5 Australians suffering from food insecurity against that backdrop. Last year, Food Bank released their most recent hunger report. On any given day, more than 500,000 households. I'm not going to go through all of those stats, but you get the picture, and we can get in touch if you need more data. But that's the operating environment for our food system, where hopefully some of the things that we're doing can both prevent the food waste, make some more profit for our food businesses right along the supply chain, large and small, but also contribute to solving some of our structural challenges. Bring that to WA, we're not immune over here either. 116,000 children lived in a severely food insecure household last year. That means those households are struggling to put food on the table, and they're making active choices about whether they pay their bills or they buy groceries. That gets me out of bed in the morning, and hopefully after this it'll help us to rethink some of our decisions we're making in our own lives as well. Jumping out of that, because I don't want to stick in food insecurity. Where is this food loss and waste happening in our supply chains? We are relatively unique in Australia. When you see this graph for many of our comparable OECD countries, it's even more heavily skewed to the consumer. But in Australia, about 22% of our produce is not leaving the farm. Another 17% or so lost in the manufacturing or processing space. 10% in distribution and retail. They probably caught a lot of the rap. And when we think about food waste, it's often our retailers and supply chains that we think of. They are immensely important. Our big food businesses and our retailers play a pivotal role. You'll know our top 2 retailers are both within our top 5 most trusted brands in Australia. So if anyone's going to have a platform to communicate about that 52% or 51% of food waste that's occurring at the consumption ends of the supply chain, it's absolutely integral that they are part of that discussion and on the journey. They're also the biggest procurers of food from all of our growers, large and small. So in terms of supply chain solutions, how do we work with that supply chain? Not to just impose costs down, we don't want to push the cost back to our growers, but how can we share the cost, share the benefit, and make better choices with our food supply. What does that mean in practice? It's a very waffly thing to say. That means longer term, less confrontational procurement policies. For example, if we can give a 5 or 10 year contract to a grower, that's something they can take to the bank to invest in the CapEx that they need to meet the supply chain specification to reduce the food waste. It's not just about, right, Mr. Green Team or Red Team introducing a new standard and the growers have to comply. It's how can we build that collaborative model without shaking everything up, but build a shared vision around where we can get to and how we can make a better, more efficient use of our resources that are going to grow our food. So what are we doing? The Australian Food Pact. I'm not going to go through this in detail, and we can make sure these slides are circulated, but I touched on it before. We want to embed new criteria into design, buying and sourcing. This is not rewriting MPD processes or procurement policies, but when they're being revisited, how are we addressing or considering food waste upstream and downstream. We want to optimize the supply chain. What does that mean? It means walking the chain. It means starting in the field, following that produce right through. So we actually understand how it is that in a field of 100 potatoes, only 25 are being consumed. We want to influence consumer and business behaviour change. Now, those are two very, very different things, but fundamentally it's about the food that comes into our operational control, be that your own household, be that your manufacturing facility. How do we make sure we're valuing that food and our people are valuing that and see their role, not just in completing a process, but forming a fundamental part of our food system and getting what is a human necessity to people that need it. And then find innovative ways to make best use of food. We have a sister organisation, the Fight Food Waste CRC. I'm not going to labour that. You'll hear from Francesca very shortly, who will be able to talk you through the transformation opportunities for food. But at its absolute simplest, that's donation of surplus, keeping food in the supply chain as long as we possibly can. At its most complex, it's extraction of nutraceuticals or all the other exciting technologies you'll hear about shortly. And those brands you can see on the slide, they're our current signatories to the Australian Food Pact. So those are the organisations that at this stage we're always looking to grow, but so far those that have committed to being part of this collaborative journey. How do we work with them? What does collaboration look like when we bring big brands together? They're competitors, they aren't used to collaboration. The Australian system is not used to this type of model of working together to solve structural challenges. We haven't come up with it, we've borrowed it from overseas because that's our whole model, but we are facilitating what we're calling working groups. So we went out to our initial pact signatories and we said, here's a laundry list of potential collaboration that we believe are genuinely pre-competitive. Where do you want to play? Where is it that you would feel safe around the table with your supply chain peers and with your competitors solving some of the structural challenges? Probably no surprise to anyone in this room, the first one that came up was the mitigating greenhouse gas emissions through food loss and waste reduction. So emissions, net zero, scope 3, all of those things are coming at food businesses like a freight train. And we are in a prime position in Australia to work out how we position ourselves as leaders in this space. The working group, along with many of our partners, I know the Australian Food Cold Chain Council are a part of that work, as are the Australian Food and Grocery Council, bringing all of their members along on the journey as well, so that we can ultimately form a revenue stream from food waste prevention for our food businesses. Possibly surprisingly, but really I think it speaks to the heart of the people in businesses, because we don't just deal with organisations, we deal with individuals, and they want to play their role in food rescue. And that working group of maximising food rescue, that's about moving away from surprise chain donations, where we've got surplus that through inventory management, oversupply, we've got a glut, whatever it's been. Traditionally, that's been dropped onto food rescue, and it's been their challenge to try and move it to those that need it. As we work with our signatories, we want to get to a point where we don't have those supply chains, but we don't want a negative impact in food rescue. So how do we move towards a social good programmatic donation system where the food rescue organisations have the food they need when they need it? So we are asking all of our major manufacturers and retailers to commit to maintaining or increasing their donation volumes, but moving away from the surprise chain. Up next, we'll be launching 2 new working groups. One is policy and regulation. That's very exciting. We live in a diverse country with multiple jurisdictions, all with their own slightly different take. Possibly not as diverse as the States. Fortunately, we're not trying to wrangle 52, but there are some challenges across jurisdictions for our signatories. And we want to play a role in facilitating that conversation using our unique place where we can have a direct line to all of the state governments and the federal government but also as a trusted voice for and of industry to solve, again, not a specific policy challenge, but to create a policy environment that is not itself causing food waste. We also want to talk about the role of packaging in reducing food waste, and we'll hear a little bit more about that shortly from Nerida. But we will be bringing our signatories together to discuss that overlap between the National 2025 packaging targets and our 2030 National Food Waste Strategy targets, and trying to avoid any perverse outcomes as part of that. This is just a snapshot of what a signatory does get as part of the Australian Food Pact annual reporting process. So we wanted to make sure we were providing value back to the businesses, not just collecting their data, aggregating it and reporting to government. So we're taking their food and we're putting it back in what we think is, and what they've told us, are statistics that will help them to build the case internally to do more and do it faster. I'm not going to go through these in any detail. This is dummy data, but the new set of metrics that our signatories have not looked at before, looking at food not sold as a percentage of weight, not talking in dollars, just the pure mass balance of food coming in and going out has been incredibly valuable. Similarly, looking at sorry. Then there's the dollars attached to what we call reuse destinations, food donation, upcycling, for example. What's that value to the business compared to their end of pipe management solution, or the opportunity cost of that product not being sold as intended? And the differences are stark. So you can see there, we won't go through those stats, but we give them a lost value of food not sold. We also give them that lost value of food not reused. Talk a little bit about consumers. This is not my area of expertise, but as we saw earlier, the food waste is occurring in the consumption end of the supply chain. That's 50-odd%, 30-odd% of food loss or food waste is occurring in our households. So we all have a role in that. Yes, we can do wonderful things, and we need to do things with FOGO collection, management, compost, AD. All of those things are essential, but we also need to look at how we can prevent that waste, build some of the food skills in the kitchen that our grandparents probably had to get more value from what we're purchasing, start to reduce that every third shopping bag that we're currently wasting. Especially, I think, in our current inflationary environment, I think this message only gets more and more true. We put together a business case on what a nationwide campaign might look like and some of the value that Australia might derive if we were to take seriously influencing the consumer. Now, this isn't something that government can run in isolation. It's not something that one retailer could go out and start talking about. They already do that already. This is about bringing all of those trusted voices together to have a consolidated view of what the best practices should be for household food waste prevention. Talked a little bit before about sector action plans. Now, these are a very different model. Typically, these have been sponsored by a state government based on the type of manufacturing or the type of sectors in their jurisdiction. We think about them in terms of 5 pillars. So policy levers, what are the policy interventions that can turn the dial in that sector? We want to build a community of practice. What does that mean? We want more people to understand food waste, our food system, and some of the opportunities within it. We know that it's an emerging area. We've only had a food waste strategy in Australia for less than 6 years, just over 5 years. So it is very new, and we just need to be shouting from the rooftops about the opportunities. Part of that is wherever we see people wanting to do things, how can we facilitate that conversation? Critically, we don't have all the answers. So what's the role of RD&E? Monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and impact. Mary, very important. Can't overstate the importance of demonstrating the impact of what we're doing. And finally, we don't want to write plans that sit on a shelf. So how do we get them implemented? Next steps. I promised Phil that I'd have 3 things that we could take away from today. If you're a food business, if you know people in food businesses, talk to us about the Australian Food Pact. It is the one collaborative vehicle where we can actually seriously look at some of the structural challenges in our food system. Bring it back personally. What can you do? Engage with everyone you know. Have the conversation with your consumers, with your customers. Talk to your food rescue organisations. Volunteer, go on a van drive with them and see the world through their eyes. Have a look at your own fridge. And last but certainly not least, as soon as we start measuring, as soon as we put a kitchen caddy on a kitchen bench top and start putting our food waste in it, our behaviour starts to shift because we can visualise the opportunity. So that is true in a manufacturing environment. It's true in the back of house at retail. It's true in your own kitchen. Thank you very much. 15 seconds to go.